CD, radio ad, a DJ or even a sound system for your wedding, birthday or special occasion, then why not get in contact with KTR Records on 07931 152 448 or check out our website on www.ktrrecords.com. We've been in business since 2004 and also undertake community projects. So for your remixes, dubplates and all your sound editing needs, why not contact KTR Records, official sponsor of World Jam Global Radio. KTR Records, coming your way.
Dyslexic, the silent different. Sandra here from the UK, the community person working for A1 Tribe. The book was written to support people that have a very low understanding of dyslexia. If you're struggling and not understanding why your literacy skills are poor and what steps you can take to get people to help you and to improve for yourself, handle the emotional sides of not being able to read well, it's worth getting hold of the book, and maybe some of the information in it can support you. It's available now on amazon.co.uk or amazon.com. Check it out. It's called Dyslexic, the Silent Different. Peace and love. Sandra. Sign.
Skunkworks Digital, a digital marketing agency that designs high-quality websites and email marketing campaigns. Need help? We can update and maintain your current website. Your website is an extension of your business. From large to small, we're here to help. Contact us on www.skunkworks.dev. Skunkwork Digital, the new breed of agency for the digital era.
Do you like music like this?
Great music all the time.
Or like this?
The music you love.
Maybe this.
Great music that makes you want to turn up the volume loud.
Or life track like this.
Especially where human life is concerned. Surely, sooner or later, people will realize that lives actually matter.
Then you're in the right place. Keep it locked to World Jam Global, where music is harmony.
Music 24 hours a day, 365 days a year.
Yeah, I'm a World Jam. Hotter than them.
See live schedule.
I already did my time. I paid for my crime. I already did my time. I paid for my crime. I already did my time. I paid for my crime. I already did my time. I paid for my crime. I already did my time. I paid for my crime.
I want to say a big good evening going out to each and every single one of you.
Back in the day, I didn't really.
No matter where you are, or no matter what you're doing.
All about
This is Issues Today live on World Jam Global Radio. You can catch us live on www.worldjamglobalradio.com. You can catch us live on YouTube. You can catch us live on Twitter. And you can catch us live on Facebook.
I had girls all over the street. I was getting money. Life is so sweet. Now things have changed. The whole game has been rearranged. I'm a changed man. Don't need no gun.
Joining us for a very special,
no gangster life is too
exclusive interview.
Jail.
With the executive director of Nicole.
Jail.
Now Nicole, not Nicole, but Nicole is the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement.
I paid for my crime.
And we're going to be talking to Liane Perez.
I paid for my crime.
Executive Director, so stand by, please.
Did my time.
Every aspect of our judicial and penal system scrutinized and examined. All the questions that you want to have answered will be asked. So please use this opportunity to queue up your questions. We'll be back with you in a very short time.
Superfly, but I never got high on my own supply. I'm not proud of what I had to do. That's why.
Shout outs to Alan Langham, who's been recovering from a very big hand injury up there in Doncaster.
Back and thinking over since I've got.
Big shout out to our very own Stephanie Babb, who's tuning in live.
I was young and dumb.
Christian Wagstaff up in South Wales. Patricia Darcy in London.
Me and
Luke Stevens right here in Coventry.
Was the real term.
Jill Stansfield, and I think she might still be in Spain. I'm not sure, but
you out.
Hey, how you doing?
A gator, especially all you haters.
The opening statements are going on right now. He could be facing life in prison.
You know, the thing is, for many a months now, we've been talking with the round table, where we've been having these discussions about how we can impact law enforcement, or the way law enforcement operates, or the judicial system, prosecutorial misconduct, unlawful killing, get justice for families who are struggling to get
Already did my
justice done for the loss of their loved ones. How we can impact qualified immunity, the biggest stranglehold on justice.
Already did my time. I paid for my crime.
How we could review or get them to review the officer's Bill of Rights.
My life on track and have the right to
and so many issues pertaining to law enforcement and the way that they're governed.
in the pen, statewide, worldwide.
Today I want you to stand by us alongside
Good with my hands and
our right hand and producer TJ Therese Gallagher.
Girls
returned after a long time.
Sweet.
Well, it felt like a long time she was off with an illness.
I'm a chain.
Crohn's disease was really causing her a few problems, but she's back with us, riding shotgun with me once again.
Jail.
And alongside TJ, we do have
did my time.
Author,
for my crime.
Former Chief of Police, Roundtable member,
Did my time.
Jerry Summers.
Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time.
Father of Tyler Russian, we have Scott Russian.
Did my time. I paid for my crime.
Activist and Roundtable member.
I was a drug dealer, sold more drugs than Superfly, but I never got.
So please stand by.
I'm not proud of what.
In just a very few short moments.
Telling my story to you and you. I had to repent. I must admit, I was doing all kind of stupid shit. Now sit back and think it over since I've gotten older. The life I used to live, I wouldn't do it again. I was young and dumb, my brain was so numb. I was a real Forrest Gump, but I was nobody's chump. Me and Billy the Kid had a lot in common. I was the real Terminator, much meaner than Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'd chew you up and spit you out like a real alligator, especially all you haters. Already did my time, paid for my crime. Already did my time, already did my time. I paid for my crime, already did my time.
The opening statements are going on right now. He could be facing life in prison.
Wow!
Vanessa Whirling says that today I'm in a COVID-19 free space working alone, painting concrete stones, and will be listening but not able to post until the show is over.
Living here.
Big shouts out to you, Vanessa.
Trying to cope with this living here. Yes I am, yes I am, yes I am, yes I am, yes I am. Trying to cope with this living here. This living hell, this living hell, this living hell. Already did my time, I paid for my crime. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread.
You know, I don't like saying that this is going to be a big show, that this is going to be a huge show. Because for me, every story is important and every guest matters.
And evil, for thine is the kingdom.
But it's very rare we get somebody of
and ever. Amen.
Seth Houghton we had a while back ago absolutely blew the lid off of qualified immunity. I'm really hoping to make some real progress on today's show with Liane Perez, Executive Director of NACOL. That's the National Association for Civilians.
He is our sin.
Law enforcement.
The first stone. I'm trying to get this felony off my back so I can get my life on track and have the right.
Did I get that right? National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement.
My friend.
Ooh, gotta get it. That's a mouthful. Tongue twister.
Wide. And put down those knives. Stop stabbing each other. Yeah.
Please stand by. We'll be going live very shortly. No matter who you are, no matter where you are. Okay, well, my name is Kervin Julien, and I'm your host of Issues Today, which goes out live each and every week on World Jam Global Radio. You can catch us live on www.worldjamglobalradio.com. You can catch us live on Twitter, you can catch us live on YouTube, and you can catch us live on Facebook. This is going out right across the world, live on internet, and it's the only internet platform radio show that does exactly what we do here. Our guests are all related, and all of our stories are related to either police brutality or wrongful convictions, but more importantly, to anything that breaches our human basic civil rights. Today we have with us a guest who is the Executive Director of NACOL, which is a National Association for Civilians Oversight of Law Enforcement. I'll get it right one day, don't worry. It's a mouthful and it's a tongue twister, but alongside Liane Perez, or Liana Perez, because she needs to be called Liana, and if you don't get it right, she'll let you know about it too. It's Liana Perez, and we have, apart from Jerry Summers, former Chief of Police of Idaho and an author, and Scott Rushin, we have once again riding shotgun, returned from ill health, and I couldn't do this show without her. God knows how much I need her. She's my shotgun. She's my shotgun rider. She's my right hand. She's my heartbeat as far as Issues Today is concerned. Another warm welcome back to TJ Therese Gallagher. How are we doing, TJ?
We're doing good. How are you, Bob?
We're doing fine. TJ, you know, for me, before we go into this show, COVID-19 coronavirus has got a real grip on the whole world right now. Here in the UK, we've just jumped from 50 deaths a day to 260 in the last 24 hours. And I've just been watching the news over the last 2 to 3 days, especially of the impact that it's having in New York, across the pond there, especially in New York. And apparently the president's getting very close to quarantining several states of the United States of America due to the massive impact that COVID-19 coronavirus is having. What's it like where you are, TJ?
Where I am in Utah, they confirmed 558 deaths now.
Wow.
Excuse me. I'm sorry. They've confirmed 558 cases. There's been 33,000 deaths. No recovery periods that I see yet on the statistics. It's horrendous. It's unbelievable.
It is. But the most important thing is that, are you self-isolating? Are you following the correct protocol?
Oh, yes.
And
yeah.
And I think that's even while we're here, before we get tucked into the show, that's the most important information that we can give out to anybody anywhere in the world right now, is wherever you are, whatever you're doing, follow the guidelines and the protocol that's been put in place for your safety. Because I'll tell you what, I'm watching the news today and I'm seeing people out in South Africa and other places where they're just not complying. And I think we're going to see some real serious outbreaks in certain places in 2 to 3 weeks' time if they don't kind of fall into line and comply. We just want everybody to be safe, right?
That's right.
Okay.
And, people think it's invincible, boss. And so they go out there, they think, I can just go here, go there really quick, and they don't realize that they could be carriers, and that it's very detrimental that they follow the guideline of staying home and staying safe and washing your hands and, clean.
Well, we've had our Prime Minister going out every day giving these messages, and then on Friday he's locked down. He's contracted the virus himself. He's tested positive. Prince Charles has tested positive. Our Health Secretary has tested positive. People in high places. This coronavirus takes no prisoners. Right? It's not prejudicial. It's not racist. Doesn't care who you are. Doesn't care whether you're rich, poor, black, white, Chinese. Doesn't care. This coronavirus ain't taking any prisoners. So, you guys, you just need to stay safe. But I'm glad to know that you're okay where you are and you're following the guidelines.
I'm glad you're okay still. How is it there?
Again, as I said, we've just jumped from 50 deaths a day in the last 24 hours, we've gone up by 260. It's the biggest leap by a mile since coronavirus broke out here in the UK. And we're just down on our first week of lockdown. Most people have had to stop working, or most businesses have shut. McDonald's, Kentucky, all food shops, restaurants, gymnasiums, leisure centers, any non-essential service has been shut down. And people are being forced to stay at home, stay off the streets.
I've never seen it before like this, Bob.
No,
Ever.
it's worse than a wartime shutdown, right?
Yes.
But
yes, it is.
But here's the thing: is I can't help it. When I was speaking with God the other day, God said, "This too will pass." He said, "This too will pass," and I get that. This too will pass. But in order for us to come through it successfully, we still need to be wise and follow the protocol. But thank you very much, TJ. And again, thank you for putting on this show and getting this show organized, because we got a huge show ahead of us today, right? Hi, TJ. Yeah?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm going in and out, though, boss.
Okay,
Losing
so
your connection.
I'll take it on from here if you're struggling with the connection. So let's grab first and foremost. I just love to have this guy anytime we're doing a live show, to be honest, especially when it comes to these sort of matters. There ain't a better person to have in the house. He's been out for a little bit. He came back last week and totally surprised us. But it's great to have him back on board. Former Chief of Police of Idaho and an author, as well as the one we call, Papa Bear of the Round Table team. It's none other than Jerry Summers. How are we doing, Jerry?
We're doing great. I suspect you want me to give you a coronavirus update for Idaho. Idaho is a very state. We only have 1.7 million people in the entire state. So we have 230 confirmed cases at this point and 4 confirmed deaths from the coronavirus. The governor has placed us on a 21-day lockdown, I believe, until April 20th, and where everybody is self-quarantined with the exception of essential services. So that's where we are in Idaho.
Okay, are we losing you by signal, or is it your signal that's gone, or is it mine?
No, I'm fine, I believe.
Okay, thank you very much, Jerry. Let's bring in none other than, again, he's almost as a Papa Bear. I'm thinking when Jerry's not here, he is the Papa Bear, actually. Always brings a lot of wisdom and calm to any situation and any conversation that we're having here on issues today. And it's Scott Russian. How are we doing, Scott?
This is Baby Bear checking in. Yeah. Well, I don't call me Mama Bear, please. Baby Bear.
Okay, Baby Bear will do.
I'm in California, so Governor Newsom has been, I think, rightfully out in front of the coronavirus. I don't know. It's a nightmare. That's all I can say. We're all pretty much in lockdown here, like in California. People are really not out and around, and there's always some people that feel they're absolutely invulnerable and immortal, and they're out running around. But I think it's pretty frightening. And what I see is that there's a lot of economic ripple effect from the shutdown that'll affect everybody, just everybody. And that is something that is beyond the health issue, which is not certainly resolved, Kervin. Is the economic effect of this is going to be staggering. I just don't know where exactly will stop, but it's going to change this country and certainly the state.
The funny thing is, I think because of the economic backlash of the international and worldwide impact that coronavirus is going to have, I think it's going to hit the economy far worse than just what it's going to hit you. It may even, one of the biggest fears that people might have is it could lead to a one world order money system, because I think there are going to be some countries who are in considerable debt, who are going to find it very difficult to dig themselves out of this one without significant help from another. And I think that's where the problems are really going to start for some of the smaller countries who don't have as greater an economy. And if, countries with great economies like America, China, UK, etc., if these countries are going to struggle financially with the economy and the economical backlash of having to shut down so many businesses and services, then imagine all these other smaller countries and islands, for example, that rely on these bigger countries to feed them, with business or etc. Imagine how difficult it's going to be for them to be able to pull themselves out, having had to go through this very similar process of having to shut down their systems in order for their people to survive. It's going to be a huge backlash. And I think we're all praying that we come out of this all in one piece. But it's not going to be about the money by the time we come out of this. I think it's just about everybody coming out with their health intact, able to get their hands on the plow and start rebuilding each country, each nation, back to its former glory. That's what I think that's what we're going to be looking at. But thank you very much for that, Scott. And we look forward to having your contributions as always. But without any further ado, we do have somebody that we consider to be a very special guest today, and we're going to treat her as a special guest because it's not very rare. It's not very often we get somebody come in with a title, right? Jerry, you do well with your former. You did a former chief of police, and that's a very good title to have. But coming in, in the green corner, it's Liane Perez, and she is the executive director of Nicole, and I'm going to get this right. It's the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement. How are we doing, Liane?
Very, very good. Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm honored to be a very special guest.
Tell us, before we go into why you're here and what you do, what's coronavirus like? What does it look like where you are?
Well, I'm in Arizona. I'm in Tucson, Arizona. Our numbers hadn't been as high, in the last couple of weeks as obviously New York and California. We just had it started the test, ramped up the testing. I will tell you, in the county where I live, we have a couple hundred confirmed cases. We've only had four deaths reported as of yesterday, but the numbers will be going up because they are more aggressively, testing. We don't have, a quarantine. We do have a lot of non-essential. All the restaurants and bars are closed, and of course, there's that false sense of security that you could still go to the grocery store or the store. Everybody thinks they're safe there, but obviously that's not true. So everybody's just being cautious. I mean, I work from home anyway, so for me it's like no different. But other people, especially in my household, are changed to now working from home, and it's not right. I have a son that's a paramedic firefighter, and he has to go out to work every day. And my constant worry is, what's he exposed to? I have a son with an immune deficiency who got laid off like a week ago, which was almost just as well because I'd rather him be home right now. So it's challenging. It's challenging all the way around. And, in the work that I do for NACOL too, I mean, I'm talking to people all around the country every day. Mm-hmm. Their challenges. Is it, the work that we do, or, family first? And, I don't blame them. It's, it's a balance.
Well, before we go into the work that you do, let's talk a little bit more about you, shall we, Liane Perez. Tell our audience just a little bit about you, who you are, where you're from, what type of lifestyle you live.
Well, I am a native Arizona. My children actually are sixth generation Tucsonans, so a lot of history in where I come from, and a lot of family connections in my town. I've been married 41 years. I have 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter. My daughter is in Los Angeles, California, which is pretty much under lockdown right now. Yeah. So concerned about her as well. But I've been involved in, the world of oversight for many years, over 20 years. I was the former police auditor for the city of Tucson for 14 years before, and went to work doing full-time work with NACOL as an organization because I felt that NACOL was there for me as a mentor when I first started my career in oversight, and I wanted to give back. And I've been employed by NACOL for almost 8 years now, doing the work that I do for them on a daily basis. My family's all here, like I said, in Arizona, except for my daughter. But that's my story.
Okay, well, before we go any further, I'm going to read what it says on your homepage of NACOL. And it says this: the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement, NACOL, is a non-profit organization that brings together individuals and agencies working to establish or improve oversight of police officers in the United States. NACOL welcomes people and organizations committed to fair and professional law enforcement that is responsive to community needs. NACOL, established in 1995, is incorporated under the laws of the state of Maryland. The organization has an elected board of directors which is composed of individuals in the field of citizen oversight of the police. The board manages the organization pursuant to a set of bylaws. NACOL is dedicated to promoting greater police accountability through the establishment of improvement of citizen oversight agencies by organizing an annual training conference to increase the knowledge and skills of staff members and volunteers who work in oversight, act as a resource to jurisdictions considering the creation of revitalization of oversight bodies, identifying best practices as they emerge from the experiences of members, encouraging networking, communication, and information sharing to counter the isolation inherent in the profession, and furnishing information to government officials and community representatives that will support their advocacy of oversight in their states, counties, cities, and towns. Now that's a great statement to have on your homepage. But as a layman standing by, how real is the actioning of those objectives that I've just mentioned? How real is that actioning? I mean, I've read that out and it sounds absolutely powerful. Is NACOL as powerful as what that sounds to you?
As I said, I've been involved in the organization for many years as a practitioner, and now as being part of delivering the services. I will say that everything that you just read is something we do in one or the other, and the growth of oversight in the United States over the last 10 years has been huge. More and more communities are realizing, both the need and the benefit of having oversight. I for this profession years ago, there was the perception that, oversight could just, basically was kind of an afterthought, of looking at things after the fact, on how to improve, police, relations and police interactions with the community. And now it's being thought of in more of a proactive terms as far as what can we do to prevent, officer-involved shootings. What can we do to prevent, instances that go wrong, uses of force? How can we work in a proactive manner with law enforcement agencies to better serve the communities, and so that the communities feel that they have an active role in the oversight in their community? And so basically what you've read, I would say we do all of that and probably more. I think we're almost trying to reinvent I don't want to say reinvent, but kind of repurpose ourselves on any occasion. I'm sure with this current world crisis that is happening, there will be outcomes of that we will need to address in the oversight community. Coming up on a day-to-day basis, members and agencies across the country that I speak with, there are challenges right now just because of this COVID-19. So to answer your question, I believe we do all of that, and probably will be doing even things that we haven't even thought of yet to serve our members and community.
So the first question from me, before we bring in Jerry and Scott, the one question I want to lay the platform down so that we get a real understanding of what we're doing here. Nicole, National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement. Is this community driven or is this law enforcement driven?
For the most part, it is community driven. When I'm contact, just so that we can be clear, NACOL does not actually create the oversight entities. I mean, we're a resource for the.
Just so you know, we're still struggling. Yeah, we're still.
So it's really more of a community-driven approach.
Yeah, we're still struggling with your signal, Liane.
Go ahead.
I feel that your signal. We're still struggling.
Sorry.
Just have a look at if you can have a look at your signal and see where it is. Whether you need to just move a little bit and come back, I'm not sure. But just have a look at your signal, because I really want you to be able to get across all of this information that you're trying to get across.
Right.
Okay.
I don't know if that's better or.
You're gonna have to carry. Yeah, you just gotta carry on. Yeah, I can hear you, but robotically.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. I haven't moved from where I'm at, so a little bit. So, like I said, assisting is very community driven, and what we're seeing more and more of is also being driven a lot by the election in various communities that are recognizing the effects and the potential, increases in community and police relationships in their community, when they create oversight.
Okay, so let's just bring in.
Lots of times we are actually.
Okay, so what you're just to clear that up a little bit, what you're really saying is this is more community driven than law enforcement driven, and your accountability is to who?
To the community.
Scott, let's bring in Scott. How are we doing, Scott? You're going to have to unmute.
Okay, sorry.
Go on.
I had to get my off mute there. Yeah, of course, I have a lot of questions, and I don't want to control the interview and put Liane on the spot. But basically, I'll just launch off, and then we can kind of free flow. Could you give the listeners, Liane, an example of, say, how Nicole has worked with civilians that want oversight of law enforcement in, say, large communities or small communities? Could you just give a couple of examples? Because I don't think the listeners, including me, until I talked to Norm Stamper, who I'd never heard of Nicole and the organization at all. So maybe you can give us a little background on how it works. Give us a couple of examples. Are you there, Liane?
Right now, can you hear me?
No, I'm sorry. You're cutting in and out on my phone. On my
on your.
Yeah,
I can hear everybody but you.
Yeah, your signal is weak again.
On my end, it's showing. Can you hear me now? Hello?
Yeah, we can. Yes, I can hear you.
I can hear you. You're probably outside in the garage.
No, I'm by the window that we're asked to get it.
Yeah, it's just kind of chopping you off. The words are chopped and.
I'm sorry. Let me move around a little bit. Trying to. Maybe closer. How about now?
Yeah,
that sounds pretty good to me.
Yeah, let's get you in now. But while you're clear, let's get you responding now.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I am up in my garage now.
Sorry.
Yeah, we're not hearing you at all now.
Well, let me ask my question again, Liane, and then while you're trying to get a signal there, what I was looking for, listening to, your, initial comments, and then looking through the Nicole side and having some questions. Of course, the listeners don't know that I went to the symposium in Texas a few days ago in March. Seems like a long time ago, doesn't it? But I went to Texas and I listened to the seminar, and I was able to speak with Seth Stoughton, and I sat at lunch with Julien, the professor from NYU, the law professor, and we were discussing some issues related to, obviously, transparency, which is a big word and it's kind of undefined. But what I was struggling to get a hold of, Liane, was how it really works, how your organization works with committed groups, say, of citizens in a small community or a large community, and really make it work, given all the potential personalities and politics of every community. I mean, how does Nicole interact, and what has been successful in your opinion?
I'm not sure can you hear me?
Yes. I heard you right then. Yes.
You heard me right then?
Yes,
okay.
Right now. I can hear you right now.
Okay. So, I mean, when you ask the question about successful in our community, my community, we've had oversight for over 20 some years. And in the city of Tucson, it was actually created based upon a group of community activists that went before our elected officials and wanted to create an oversight entity for the city of Tucson. But in other communities, it's a little bit different as far as how they're created. We're currently doing some work in Georgia, a small town in Georgia, as a result of a large community engagement process that has gone on there. And they basically asked Nicole to come in and go through the various options and models of oversight that are used across the country so that they can, for themselves, determine, based on the information and resource we provide them, determine what would work best in their community, given the dynamics of their community, the makeup of their community, what their needs are, what their challenges are, what their relationship currently is with their law enforcement agency. There's, a lot of conversations going on that obviously we've halted for the time being, but that's how they are working forward towards creating a meaningful oversight mechanism that works in their community. And I'm not sure I answered your question, Scott, because I was trying to fool around with my phone here to get a better signal.
You're standing on the washing machine. No, I'm just kidding.
Better now?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. And I guess what I was looking for, Liane, there's no one size fits all, obviously, civilian oversight panel or commission or whatever. But my goal, and I'll just throw this out there, I believe there's over something like 7,000 police agencies in the United States, something like over 7,000 separate entities that can set their own, if they want, use of force policies, training policies, cooperation with civilian oversight. 7,000 separate agencies, which is kind of mind-boggling, because to me that's 7,000 potential problems and disparate actions where there should be some kind of a standard of practice in the industry, in the profession. In my opinion, as a layman, what I've learned since my son was killed is that, in what happens in Tucson when someone gets pulled over by a cop is not going to be the same when someone gets pulled over in Connecticut, for a speeding ticket. And any interaction can go from a communication to a fatal shooting. I mean, I've seen it hundreds of times now, and I've talked to many families that have suffered. So and then you can't find out anything about the police officers because of the legal blocking of the records. That's where the word transparency comes in, and that's part of the mission, Nicole, is to help, build trust between the community and law enforcement through transparency. But I don't see it happening right now, Nicole. It's not your fault, and it's not Nicole's fault, Liana, but maybe you could reassure me a little bit that it is happening somewhere, that there is real transparency.
Right, and one of the things that we've been working on for the last couple of years is based on an actual grant that NACO received to try and work towards more of a consistent oversight, best practices, so to speak, because the biggest challenge in creating oversight to be meaningful across the country is, you're right, there's over 7,000 law enforcement agencies. There's only about 160 oversight entities, and every one of those oversight entities is doing business, so to speak, in a state where the laws may differ from one another as far as Officers' Bill of Rights, access to public records. So those are some of the challenges that we face in saying, oh, you should have X, Y, and Z as part of, your mode of operation as an oversight entity. Well, we know that in some states that's not possible because there are laws that prohibit, access to records. There are Officers' Bill of Rights that, prohibit us, kind of the level of involvement that the oversight agency can have. So what we have done, and it's a report that's going to be released probably by the end of May. It's out to publishing right now and layout, but part of that report basically covers, best practices in, and we're calling it effective practices across the country to be able to help oversight entities that are either already in existing or those that are being created to get some more standardization in the role that they play and the process of oversight, fully recognizing that there's different constraints across the country, because it'll be a long time before we get to that full consistency just because of the differences in what kind of restrictions and laws govern different states. So that's one of our biggest challenges. And we do have oversight agencies for, some of our biggest, Los Angeles Police Department, New York City Police Department, and then we have some very small oversight agencies for agencies that have only 200 officers or 100 officers that are just as effective based on, the size of the law enforcement agency that they oversee.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. That's kind of a shocking number, though, 7,000 agencies and 160 civilian oversight, regardless of the model. I don't think our listeners know that. That's right. Quite a disparate number there. And, I guess that, what bothers me is overall, is there acceptance in the, let me put it this way. I would imagine that the police push back against not only the civilians, but your organization, which is trying to work with civilians, and to kind of pierce that secret veil of law enforcement. I mean, is that your experience or not?
I will tell you that was my experience probably 10 years ago. But now what we're seeing more and more of is that law enforcement agencies, especially the chiefs, are recognizing the role that oversight can play and how it can actually assist them in doing their job more effectively as well. I mean, certainly they're not going to give in to, oversight agencies having full control of, investigating their officers. I mean, there's always going to be the pushback on that. But I think that over the years, especially in the last 10 years, there's more acceptance to the role that oversight plays in their communities. So there is probably less pushback. I'm not going to say, it's gone, because it never will. But yes, that is one of the biggest challenges that, especially the communities that are just trying to create something are going to face.
Well, obviously, I can't imagine the police, maybe I'm wrong, the police union calling Nicole and saying, gee, can you come to our community and help police us? I mean, I can't see that happening.
Exactly.
I mean, maybe
that's one of the biggest challenges. Yes.
I mean, that would be Disneyland and the Twilight Zone, combined. I am concerned a little bit about how Nicole, for example, will help different groups work for this transparency goal, accountability goal, like Black Lives Matter or the ACLU or the NAACP. I mean, it doesn't appear that Nicole gets off into racial issues, that you tend to just focus on transparency. And so that's two questions. Am I right? And how do you interact with groups that maybe have a particular mission, like ACLU, civil rights more related? How does Nicole interact with those groups?
Well, there are several ACLU chapters across the country that are members of NACOL, and they regularly attend our conferences and a lot of our training sessions. So we recognize the work that they do as being very informative to, obviously, our mission. And we do try to include them, and we are trying to get included in their platforms as well, recognizing that we may have different missions, but there are probably more similarities than there are differences. So the head of the Black Lives Matters in Los Angeles, for example, she was one of our NACOL scholarship recipients several years ago, because we wanted to get her to a NACOL conference, and they didn't have the funding to do that. And so we paid for her to come to one of our conferences several years ago, because we wanted her voice shared amongst, our membership as well. So we try to include them on, our educational panels and, our webinars and so forth. So we're not, we're coming at this, I believe, in kind of multifaceted approaches, which I think benefits, both our NACOL and, agencies such as, the ACLU and Black Lives Matters and all the other advocacy groups out there as well.
So you don't see, Nicole, your board does not see these groups as adversarial in any way. You would see them as somebody that you see as another resource of, information on, again, the mission, which is accountability and transparency.
Exactly. And we try to partner with them as much as possible.
Are there any lawsuits against Nicole right now from, say, police officers unions? Any lawsuits?
No.
I'm shocked that there wouldn't be like some, PBOA, that's a police, anyway, the Police Bill of Rights groups. They're not suing Nicole anywhere in the country, or these 160 that you're working with, these civilian oversight groups that exist.
That I can't tell you, because I'm not aware of what, each of the individual agencies may have. I know some of them have had challenges. As an example, Newark, New Jersey, created an oversight entity about 2 years ago with a lot of training and resources from us, with assistance from the ACLU in New Jersey. And the minute it went to a ballot initiative to be able to create their agency, and it was immediately challenged by the police officers unit in, I think, state level. There was a injunction filed, and I believe that's coming to a resolution right now. But that's kind of the only one that I'm aware of that was, to the effect that it had on basically stopping that agency from ever even getting off foot from the get-go. But I'm not aware of any other ones that are in existence right now. I mean, obviously there's the day-to-day challenges as far as, the authority of each of these agencies, but not to the extent of lawsuits.
Well, I noticed that on the board of directors, many of them were attorneys or currently or former attorneys. Maybe I'm wrong about that. It appeared that you had a number of attorneys, including Susan, who I was able to meet. Your president. Susan Hudson. Yeah. She has a law enforcement background as well as I didn't quite understand some of her titles, like Inspector General. Maybe you could explain, like the president of your organization was an Inspector General. Well, what is that? What's an Inspector General?
She's actually the independent monitor for the city of New Orleans. So she is the head of that agency. And she is an attorney, but she's not an attorney in her capacity as the president of NACOL. Our board of directors are elected by our membership, and they represent a wide range of different oversight models in the communities that they are working in. We have one in Los Angeles. She works for, she's an attorney, but she's also does oversight of corrections facilities in the Los Angeles area. So there are the titles of the heads of these agencies can vary anywhere from, independent police auditor, independent monitor, inspector generals. Some of them, the title of an inspector general, sometimes it's given to them with respect to, there are several federal consent decrees in some places across the country that require cities to have created oversight models. New Orleans is one of them. They are under a federal consent decree. They're actually out of it now, but they were under a federal consent decree. So sometimes those titles are given as a result of, other legal mandates that are placed upon them.
Yeah, let's just talk about that for a second, the consent decree. I don't think my roundtable group, Kervin and the group, and the listeners are really familiar with what a consent decree is and how that would affect, civilian oversight and maybe, Nicole's involvement. How would you explain a consent decree to a layman, a layperson?
So in the United States, a federal consent decree can come about where the United States government is usually the U.S. Department of Justice, as a result of an investigation that they do on a law enforcement agency, will come in and order that community or that jurisdiction to put things in place for a period of anywhere between, they're usually up to, minimum I've seen is like a 5-year consent decree to basically address the issues that they found. So in other words, if they found there were systemic problems with racial profiling, with use of force, with access to a complaint filing system, all those things will be put into this federal consent decree that the jurisdiction must sign on to and agree to correct in a set period of time. And then there's usually a federal monitor, which is usually a federal judge, that is kind of leads the monitoring team to ensure that the direction of that consent decree is being upheld. In other words, are they making progress to, reducing use of force? Are they making progress in the number of complaints or how complaints are taken? One of the most recent federal consent decrees was the one in Ferguson, Missouri, that came out as a result of all the things that were happening there. I believe that was 2014, 2015, if I'm not mistaken. Yes. And they are under a federal consent decree. They have a federal monitor and a monitoring team that is, I believe they are under a consent decree for 5 years. Now, the challenge or the biggest, possibility of the harm to the agency can be, the federal government financially provides law enforcement agencies with a lot of, equipment and funding for, hiring a police officer. So if you are found to be not in compliance with federal consent decrees, they can pull that funding from you. So that's the biggest deterrent to not, complying.
So the big stick is money. It's not really like these certifying officers. It's money. is the
money.
big stick. Yeah. Well, that's a little troubling. I mean, it's not your. I appreciate your point of view and I agree with it, but it should be just plain old decertifying rogue cops instead of defunding the department. You know what I'm saying? It just doesn't. Those two things should not be opposites.
Right.
It should just be automatic. It's not your. I mean, you're just observing, and that's why I'm asking you. So
right.
I just find it troubling. That's all. As a layman, that's why I wanted you on the show, because our listeners just don't have a clue.
Yeah. So Scott, we're gonna hold you down. Yeah, we're gonna hold you down just for a few moments, and we're gonna try and balance this out by bringing in Jerry if we can, and then we're gonna be coming back to you very shortly, Scott. So coming in, Jerry, was there anything that you wanted to bring into that to try and balance that out in any way?
Oh, absolutely. A couple things. Let's go back into the 1800s, where Sir Robert Peel said the police are the public and the public are the police. That is the basis for community policing throughout the United States. And transparency should be an automatic. Unfortunately, law enforcement has stepped away from some of that. I happen to be in a state where transparency is almost impossible to achieve, not to be transparent, because we have the laws restricting disclosure of many things. Personnel issues, investigations. As a chief of police, if I truly wanted to, I could say that incident is currently under, and that could exempt any disclosure of any of the records. And it's as simple as that. And that's somewhat frustrating. One of the concerns I have, and one of the things I'd like to see is, let me ask the question of Liane, and let me try to phrase it correctly. Does a civilian oversight committee have any authority, not of the police department, not of the investigation of the officers themselves, because I believe that still needs to be internal, but does it have any authority over the administration of that department? For instance, if the chief of police was responsible to a civilian oversight committee, then what you're looking at is a top-down strategy that's going to be infused of transparency. The 160 agencies that are currently having the oversight committees, either, and correct me if I'm wrong, either it was a motion brought about by the chief of police who wanted to improve transparency with their community, and they understood the basis of law enforcement. The second would be that it came about as a result of the consent decree, which we've already covered, or the committee, the local politicians have created an oversight committee. One of the things I'm hearing is there doesn't appear to be a consistent or most effective balance of oversight committees. I know, for instance, Boise had what they called an ombudsman, and when the chief of police, a couple of years after 5 fatal police shootings occurred, they appointed an ombudsman as an oversight committee, and then the chief of police came in, and he's now retired. But his initial thought was, I want to come in and make the department transparent enough that we don't need an ombudsman, which was a tremendous approach for a chief of police to take. And Chief Matheson eventually got to that point where the ombudsman went away because his office and his department was transparent enough that they earned the community's trust again. So I guess my question is, in the oversight committees, is there any mechanism to make the chief of police accountable to the oversight committee? And by that, one of the things in Idaho is disciplinary actions of a law enforcement officer by their department itself cannot be disclosed. So is there any way that the oversight committee can hold the chief of police and his administration or her administration below them accountable for appropriately disciplining officers that are violating either civil rights or excessive use of force or whatever the issue may be?
So just to clarify for the listeners too, I mean, there are very few, if any, I mean, probably less than 2% of the oversight entities have any authority to recommend. I mean, they can recommend discipline, but they cannot impose discipline on the officers. In other words, we're not taking away the authority of the chief of police where it should lay to be the one that's responsible for the discipline. And we understand the whole issue about the transparency with respect to, personnel records and so forth. But the accountability piece with the chief of police kind of falls within the elected officials and the public reports that the oversight agencies are writing. So if the oversight agencies are writing these public reports and saying, and not naming any names of officers, but basically saying, okay, we reviewed X number of investigations, or we were involved in X number of investigations against officers, and here were the outcomes, and here were the disciplines, and not naming officers, but naming like the percentages, or here are the number of recommendations that we made that the chief did not take action on. Then the accountability piece, if you're making those reports public, the accountability piece really lies within the elected officials who, for the most part, are the ones appointing the chief of police. And I know that most chief of police, and you would know this too, I mean, you're accountable to your bosses, which are usually the elected officials or the city managers of these, jurisdictions. So it's kind of like the oversight agencies are working in a very public, transparent manner without having to disclose, personal information about individual officers, but trying to affect change and to affect actions by the chiefs of police to make changes in their agencies. I don't know if that makes sense, but like I said, the oversight agencies do not have the authority in the majority of cases to recommend or impose discipline. But what they want to see is that there is some kind of accountability on behalf of the chiefs to take disciplinary action as necessary by doing these recommendations and so forth, and reporting numbers in a very public manner.
Okay, let me jump in, because I agree with you. I don't believe that the oversight committee should have disciplinary authority against the officers. My question is, does the oversight committee, is there any mechanism for the oversight committee to have authority over the chief of police or to recommend to the existing political, for instance, in my instance, it was a city councilor, and it was a city manager that had to recommend my termination. And if he didn't recommend my termination, the only way for me to be terminated was the entire city council had to vote unanimously to get rid of me. So my question is, can the oversight committee make recommendation to the powers that be within the community to terminate the chief of police?
Very few oversight agencies have that. I will tell you the one that has it right now, and they're finding some challenges with it, is Oakland, California, and you just saw that a couple of weeks ago where they terminated the chief of police because the oversight entity there has that authority to make the recommendation themselves, or I believe in that case, they have the authority to terminate the chief themselves. So very few of the oversight agencies have that authority. I know in the city of Tucson, if the chief of police and the auditor, are at odds as far as the effectiveness, or, things are not getting done or not getting acted upon, then the auditor could go, directly to the city manager, who would take it to the elected officials who are the ultimate authority in removing the chief of police, which is probably the case in 99% of the oversight agencies across the country.
So I guess my question is, what is the requirement, or what is the provision for the chief of police to fully cooperate with the oversight committee? In other words, in my jurisdiction, I was responsible for terminating multiple officers. I could not disclose why I terminated them to the public because it's a violation of law. But what I could do is provide the reasons for termination to the city council, the city manager, who had to approve my recommendation anyway. And then that would also go in an executive session to the city council. So they were very well aware of the actions that were taken against any particular officer and were involved in that loop in order to allow the termination to occur. My concern is that I've seen organizations and oversight committees where the chiefs of police, in essence, they have an oversight committee, but they ignore them because there is no responsibility. And what I'd like to see as part of your transparency is an accountability to that hierarchy. The other thing, in very large organizations, the chief of police can have their internal affairs lieutenant tell them that everything was done correctly where it may or may not have been done, and he can claim ignorance and say, I was told that everything was taken care of. He or she, I shouldn't just make it male, but so my concern is from my perspective, there needs to be transparency, which we've already talked about, but there needs to be accountability to the hierarchy or the administration of the organization to somehow disclose what they're doing to make things correct. If you put the chief's head on the line, if you will, through an oversight committee being able to recommend, then the likelihood of that chief being more transparent to the oversight committee and letting them know what he or she is doing is greater. Am I wrong in my assumption there?
No, you are actually very correct. And and that is something that we are kind of moving towards in this report that I reference as far as what effective practices are. And one of those being that there be something written into, because most of these oversight agencies are created either by local ordinance or city charters. And so our recommendation is being that, the actual role and authority of the oversight agencies be kind of enshrined, if you will, in these charters and ordinance as to what, when they make recommendations, that somebody has to be accountable to them, or that, that transparency piece. Do they have to write annual reports and, and publicize those, and, who has to answer to the oversight agency? Because what we're seeing is that a lot of those that were created a long time ago, some of these areas are very weak. Some of our oversight agencies were created, have been in existence. I think our oldest is like 45 years. So we weren't even talking transparency 45 years ago, but it's very real now. And that's the accountability piece that the oversight agencies have to the public. So if the oversight agency is going to have that to the public, then somebody has to be also accountable to the oversight agency with respect to acting on recommendations that are made and what happens if those are not acted on or reported to. In other words, so just like you said, so the oversight agency isn't really blown off by the chief of police. So those are some of the recommendations that we're making when some of these ordinances and charters, verbiage in the city charters are put in there, because without that, there's no reason for the chiefs to actually have to comply, because there's no mandate that they do it.
Correct.
Okay. Did you want to come back with anything, Scott, before we... Hi, Scott. Unmute.
I'm back on here. Can you hear me now? Yeah.
Now I can, yeah.
No, I was just to piggyback on Jerry's idea, Liane. One thing maybe it's not in the mission statement of NACOL, but I think it's worth talking about, is that accountability to the police chief. One thing, in other words, his job is on the line. If he is not meeting the goals, whatever they may be, that were recommended, the goals and objectives of the civilian oversight, regardless of the model, that there is. How would you feel if you're a volunteer, you're on a civilian oversight, and you work hard, you have meetings, and you make these recommendations, and the police chief says, pats you on the head, Liane, and says, thank you so much, I'll get back to you. And they, of course, never do. And that's what I've seen in the community where my son was killed, which I started studying, obviously, 3 years ago, that the chief blows off any civilian oversight. He does just that. I'll get back to you. I'll send you an email. I'll call you. And he never does. So I mean, the accountability is missing, Liana. That's the point. I just wanted to, and it's worth talking about. It's really nothing NACOL can do, except talk about it. I think bring it up.
No, I agree with you. I mean and that's very real in many of the oversight agencies, and that's the frustration, especially those that work with oversight agencies that are all volunteers, because then you start losing your volunteer members because they're spinning their wheels. It's like, why are we making recommendations if nothing ever comes of them? So there has to be that accountability piece in there one way or another. And I know that it's a huge struggle for many of the oversight agencies across the country. And again, I think that's why we're pushing towards, having that language enshrined in, the city ordinances or the charters to require an accountability piece as far as, at least a response as to why you're not going to do what we're recommending, but some kind of a feedback or some kind of a response, some kind of an accountability to the oversight agency. But the piece that's missing on a lot of this is that we don't talk about often enough is that it's the elected officials that are ultimately creating or supporting or not supporting the oversight agency. And so sometimes they play a crucial role in the level of support that they're going to give to the oversight agency. And who are they accountable to? They're accountable to their constituencies that get them elected, right? So you have to look at all the layers of accountability here. And, oftentimes some of these oversight agencies are created where the elected officials don't feel there's a need for the oversight in their community. So therefore, they're not willing to enforce any requirements on, themselves or the chiefs of police to be responsive to the oversight agency. So that's like a whole other level of hierarchy that, needs to be addressed as well in order for the oversight agencies to be effective.
Well, I can only agree. And I mean, I'm glad we're talking about it, and I hope, people at home are listening across the country, and start to poke their elected officials and get them to act, so that the PCAB, the police community advisory boards, and other type agencies, Liana, across the country are not just cheerleading groups, for law enforcement. I mean, that's what I see in particularly the community where my son was killed. And actually, Professor Julien, when we're at the seminar, he had mentioned the effectiveness of the police community advisory board in the city where my son was killed. And I happen to know they're totally ineffective from my own research. And when I talked to the professor, I didn't want to give him a bad time, but I had to tell him, that his slide was quite incorrect. It's an illusory. I'm being polite. I think you can tell. I'm being deferential to Julien. You know him. I really don't know him, but he was quite shocked to find out what I knew. And actually we've emailed a couple of times, because I verified what I told him in person. And he said, Liana, he would update his slide.
Oh, very good. Very good.
For me. And because it's still, though, a job that needs to be done. I mean, think about it. And then I'll go on mute to the panel and to the listeners. I want to. Well, go on. You finish off. Shut up. Well,
no,
go on.
No, go on one more, and then I'm going to come in because there's a couple of questions I want to ask.
You got something on your mind?
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. I'm on. No, you go on, Scott, because you're on fire.
Yeah. Yes, my blood pressure is going up a little bit here. Liana, I just wanted to say that, one thing I've been thinking about the civilian oversight since the symposium, and that's why I really wanted you to be on the show, is that, every city in this country has some kind of, advisory boards, for example, school boards, planning commissions, city councils, and yet, and law enforcement is a huge part of every budget of every community across this country. And yet there's no accountability. And that shocks me. And that's why we need you really and people like you with your knowledge to share that message, because it just doesn't make any sense. And I'll shut up.
Guys, I mean, you didn't even need me for the first hour and 15 minutes. But I do want to ask this question, if I pray can, and if you've already answered it and I've missed it, then I apologize. But this is where I am, right? So, just really on the back of what Scott's just been saying there, especially for the accountability and everything else, and even for where you are and what you stand and what you're meant to be doing, and I'm going to be going into a couple of things in a second. But I've been part of various different types of committees and especially when you in a workplace when you I've been part of an employee forum, which was the replacement of the union, and sometimes you go into these meetings where you know the management have already made up their mind, but they just want the workforce to think that they're communicating with the workforce on behalf of them, so they meet with us, they pacify us, and then they come out and they roll out the meeting and says, yes, we've been meeting with the forum, we've had a great meeting, and they just go ahead with their sledgehammer and do what they were going to do anyway. So for me, what I want to find out from you at this precise moment in time is, you talk about these recommendations that you're in a position to make. Can we just talk about one or two examples of recommendations that you've made that they've actually taken on and it's actually had a positive impact to how they operate as far as accountability and transparency is concerned?
Well, I think some of the recommendations that we're going to make are, well, the recommendations in this report that I'm referencing are different than obviously some of the recommendations that some of the agencies are kind of engaged in right now. I'll give you some from a personal point of view. Sometimes it's recommendation. What we're going towards more now in the oversight world is looking at patterns and practices. Like if you are seeing consistently like the number of complaints in one area on, let's just use, traffic stops or something that are going up. So how do you drill down and use data to support the recommendations that you're making? So I'll just use my city, for example. I mean, one of the recommendations that we made years ago was, to basically start collecting more data on the traffic stops to see if, the minority population was more significantly represented in traffic stops in a particular area of town, and why was that so? We can also make recommendations for training, for increased training, especially in lieu of all the either complaints or the significant number of arrests that you're seeing, like in juveniles, and how they are disproportionately represented in the minority population. What is the driving force behind that? What are the things that are impacting that? So, I mean, those are some of the recommendations that the oversight agencies can make to be proactive in the approach of, informing both the community and the law enforcement agency that they're working with on what things that they can do to maybe turn these numbers around. Is it more training? Is it more of educating that we have to do with the youth population, the juveniles, in our community? There's, the recommendations can be vast, all the way around. I'll give you an example of something that's happening right now that's very real, and maybe I'm off track to the question that you're asking, but part of our membership right now, there's a huge contingency of our membership that are involved in corrections facilities oversight. And about 3 weeks ago, they started kind of like a group chat amongst themselves, wanting to know what was happening around the country with corrections oversight with respect to the COVID-19 virus and how it was affecting the jails and the prisons, and what policies were in place to protect those individuals with respect to the spread of this virus, right? That blog or website has kind of like taken on a life of its own with all these recommendations that are coming forward state by state over their different corrections facilities of what things they are implementing as a result of what is happening. And some of them are coming from the recommendations that the corrections oversight world, basically those agencies, are making to help, address some of these situations in, these entities across the country. So those are recommendations that are being, I think, very well heeded right now by many of the corrections oversight officials across the country as well.
Okay, I'm gonna sound pretty troublesome now, and I can't help it.
That's okay.
But I want to say this. I want to compare it to my employee forum at work, right? When I got on the employee forum about 4 years ago, we were discussing things like, should we have a smoking shelter inside the gate or outside the gate? We started discussing things like, couldn't we have a summer table out by the entrance somewhere, because the people that don't smoke don't actually have anything. The people that smoke have a smoking shelter, but the people that don't smoke in the summer, we might not want to sit down inside and have our lunch. Could we not have a summer table with a bench outside? And our managing director sat down there one day and said, if we are going to be successful in what we're doing, we're going to need to start talking board level, because talking about a smoking shelter and talking about a summer table, these things you can have. That's not a problem. Tell me how much they cost, find out how much they cost, I'll put it through to the financiers, and they'll sign it off. But what do we need to make the business better? That's what we need to be discussing. And we started to take our level of involvement to a whole new level. Now, I've just asked you, what recommendations have Nicole made that we can turn around and say that has been implemented and is successful? And I don't want to minimize what you've just said or what you've done or what you're doing or how you're going about doing it. But when we're talking about some of the levels of neglect of duty, the dereliction of responsibility, the lack of accountability, the lack of transparency, where individuals have been shot, killed, murdered, left for dead. Victor White, Little Vic, for one, guy went missing for 3 hours, having been stopped outside a store, handcuffed behind his back. And yet the police can come out and say that he managed, after having been searched 3 times and found to have no weapon, after he was missing for 3 hours in the back of a police vehicle, he managed to retrieve a gun that he never had, and although he was handcuffed behind his back, managed to shoot himself in the chest. Now, I suppose what we're trying to find out here is how deep does this accountability recommendation go? Because we've got things like qualified immunity, where police go. Where we've got issues like where local police forces investigate their own forces, where there is some irregularity. I mean, what is the purpose of Nicole? Let me just go back to this, shall I? Let me make myself clear. The mission on your site says the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement's Nicole mission is to create a community of support for independent civilian oversight entities that seek to make their local law enforcement agencies more transparent, accountable, and responsive to the communities they serve. We need to remember that they serve those communities. And one of the things that stood out for me was in your vision. It says this: law enforcement agencies act constitutionally, without bias, are respectful of the public, hold officers accountable, and seek public input in developing and implementing policies, procedure, and training. Now, policies and procedure, would that not come under the Officers' Bill of Rights?
Most likely, yes and no. I mean, obviously, to a certain extent, yes.
So, how much involvement has Nicole had in looking at the current state of Officers' Bill of Rights and whether or not, right, it makes it actually comparable or even suitable for the communities they serve? Because that's your mission there, it says, and responsive to the communities they serve.
Well, so again, Nicole, I mean, we are just, providing these recommendations to those oversight entities that are and for their communities. So you're asking kind of like the $1 million question here, or probably $10 million question here, as far as, you know, the effect that these recommendations have. And it's very hard to quantify how many, you know, what these oversight agencies are doing with the recommendations we're making to them for effective practices, because they don't have, I mean, these are just recommendations we're making as professionals in, you know, in this work. There's no measurable way to determine the effect that oversight has on a community, and we are asked that all the time. And of course, we're asked that more so when there is the resistance to creating oversight. Do we have data to support that if you have an oversight entity in place that may have all the levels of, you know, accountability requirements written into it, is there any data to support that, you know, that law enforcement agency will have, you know, less complaints of use of force, less officer-involved shootings, or that the relationships with the communities will be better? And there isn't. I mean, I will tell you that straight up. There is no data to support the effects of it. But I can tell you that from a community perspective, at least having an oversight agency, regardless of some of the authority that they have in their communities, gives oftentimes that community at least a sense of there is an outside oversight entity. And I agree with Scott. Many of them are perceived and many of them act as kind of rubber stamps, so to speak, for the oversight, for the law enforcement agency, because they do not have that level of power and authority that allows them to do much more than that. But, is the perception of the community that at least there is some outside entity that they can go to. And I will say that, that's hard to quantify, because we don't have that data. And when you're saying, the recommendations that NACL is making, I mean, we're making the recommendations to the communities and to the oversight agencies, and whether they're putting those in place or not, we don't know. So we don't know the effects that they're having in the individual communities.
I absolutely applaud what you're doing, but believe you me, I'm throwing spanners in the works deliberately. But the bottom line is, you've got to have something, and you've got to have some sort of a platform to work from. I'm just wondering sometimes, when you see the amount of unlawful killings, when you see the amount of officers that get away without prosecution, when you see the amount of families that are striving for justice, when you see families that are having to try and take out-of-court settlements and civil lawsuits because they can't get the judicial system to support them, even though the evidence clearly points to the fact that there's been an irregularity caused by an officer. We have Jerry Summers, who is a former chief of police, who has presided over many shows on this station, where we've had a family member who has spoken about a particular case where Jerry, as a former law enforcement officer, cannot stand by law enforcement because of how wrong it is, and yet we're not seeing justice. Sometimes do you feel as if you're there but you're not there?
Oh, absolutely, because there's so many different levels in the bureaucracy of obtaining justice that we can't even penetrate or have effect on. I agree. That's very true.
A question from Stephanie Babb. Did you want to come in there, Jerry?
I do. Real quickly, one of the issues, the data is available. Chiefs of police have the data. Whether they make it available is another question. I can tell you, as a chief of police, I could tell you how many stops my officers made in a year, how many arrests we made, and all that and I could track it from year to year, and I did. And I could show the effectiveness of our policies because I had that information. But somebody in an oversight committee, if the chief is not going to make that information available, does not have it. So one of my biggest, if you take nothing away from this show tonight or today, for me is that there needs to be the accountability to the oversight committee by the chief of police. And if you get that component in an oversight committee, you're going to be able to track and prove quantitatively that the policies are working or they're not working, because the data will be made available. Thank you.
Let me just drop in this. I just want to throw in this question by Stephanie Babb, because she's taken a long time to write it, so I'm going to need to read it. And Stephanie Babb is one of our roundtable team members. Her brother Captain Brian Babb, was shot dead, executed on his doorstep while having a mental health crisis, and that might be something that I want to talk about just as we go towards the end of this show. But she says this: a lot of cities do not include police-involved shootings. PDX, Andre Gladden, Eugene, or has a CRB civilian review board. I went so public, and people were so outraged. They allowed the CRB to review her brother's death. Unfortunately, they only have the information that's been given to them, which has already been sifted through internal deadly force investigation team. Police auditor Mark Gissiner was a godsend to her, personally walked her through the points she would have never had the knowledge to question. As a Vietnam vet, he countered that there would be no way anyone would see the amount of blood Brian was laying in to determine the bullet had gone through his head. The entire wound cheek was barely visible. However, her sister found the slug in the wall the next day. The result of the CRB was an 11 PowerPoint presentation of recommendations for the police to take under consideration. One suggestion, based on her observation, was to identify officers as being veterans. Eventually, they conceded, and now officers have served wear a small pin, hardly visible from more than a couple of feet away, clearly of no use to her brother. So her question is, what if any laws are being implemented to give the Oversight Committee power enough to make a difference? And secondly, how does a community start an Oversight Committee and get recognized by the department?
So, to answer the question about what if any, can you repeat that, about what if any laws are being created to require an oversight entity, or was that the question? So
her question is if any laws are being implemented to give the Oversight Committee power enough to make a difference.
Well, and again, that would come based on the local, because most of these are at the local level, right? The oversight entities. And again, going back to what I mentioned as far as if it's created by like a city ordinance or city charter, that's kind of the best you can get with respect to it's written in there that is a law, so to speak. The oversight entities that are actually created by federal, like I said, consent decrees, there is that federal mandate behind them, but there isn't any kind of like a national law, so to speak, that is requiring or putting in the exact components of the oversight entity and what authority they should have.
And the second question was, how does a community start an oversight committee and get recognized by the department?
Exactly, and that's the biggest challenge for many communities. And going back to what I said by the elected officials, because most of these are funded, going back to the money issue, most of these are funded and staffed with monies from the local, the local jurisdiction. So it's really the elected officials. You at least have to have this support of a couple of elected officials that are willing to, support the passage of any kind of local ordinances or legislation to create the oversight agency and what the jurisdiction and authority will be for the agency. So it usually starts kind of at the grassroots level with, community activists and organizers that go to an elected official or hold public meetings and, will go, to the,
Hey, have we lost you? Have we lost you, Liana?
You're still there?
Yeah, we're here now. We lost you for about a minute.
You lost? for a minute.
Yeah.
So backing up to, I mean, usually the first step is they will go to, a local, a community or advocacy group, or even individuals in the community will go to their elected officials or to their public meetings and kind of, put in so to speak, the desire or the request that the community elected officials kind of research and study or create some kind of an oversight entity. That's usually the first step, in the process. I usually tell people that the best way is to have a very inclusive approach to creating oversight with all the stakeholders that are going to be affected by the oversight entity, the community, the law enforcement agency, the individuals first, populations that are more disadvantaged, everybody that will have a stake in the creation of the level of authority and how the process works its way through the creation. Don't create something that you think you need and then create it and then figure out, well, that's not what we needed. We needed to have this. So it is a process, but there's different places to interject all the needs and the voices of the different stakeholders involved.
I just want to move this on. We've got about 25 minutes left, and I'm going to be bringing Jerry and Scott back in very shortly because I do believe Scott would probably still have a bit more to say. But there's a couple more things that I want to add to this, really. And it's just going through again your about us and your vision and your mission statement, etc. When it goes down to your values. Top two, we value all human life and the dignity of every person, and we value the public's right to be treated with dignity and respect by law enforcement. Now, dignity is a big thing, but based on the absolute outcry internationally, globally, as to how the police have responded, or their lack of response, or their lack of training, their lack of compassion when dealing with people who are going through mental health crisis. What is Nicole's stance, and what are they doing to try and improve the communication between what the police think they know and what they should know, based on all the training, implementing policies and procedures that will probably drive police to have a better understanding as how they should be approaching an individual who was having a mental health crisis? Because at the minute, what we see is people in the midst of a mental health crisis being approached as a criminal, rather than somebody that's actually having a mental health crisis, which is an illness. Do you have an opinion on that? And if you do, has there been anything that you guys have brought to the table? Has there been any conversations that have been had? Is there any policies or procedures that have been drawn up? Is there dialogue taking place to move this in an appropriate direction?
So the best I can answer that is saying, obviously, this is a very high priority for many, oversight agencies across the country. I mean, it has been for several years. And what NACL has done to address that is actually with our annual training.
Hi, I've lost you again, Liana. Most important time.
Officials come to our.
Yeah, can you? We're losing you.
There?
Yeah, no, we just lost you. Can you just take that from the top again for me?
So what we've done, what NACL has done in the last couple of years, because this has been a very important topic, of course, to our members, is we've tried to include this topic every year at our annual conference and for the webinars and educational sessions that we give, not just to our members, but non-members alike. We have had panels with both law enforcement and experts in the mental health field and experts from the community that are working with individuals with mental health challenges, to have these, these dialogues and these forums and kind of these sharing their best practices and sharing, what they've done in their communities. So we're just kind of working as, kind of a conduit for the sharing of information on, things that are effective in other communities and in other agencies. That's what we've been doing.
And what has been the response by those that, that you represent. I mean, law enforcement. You sit down on a table with, and I'm sure you mentioned when we were initially conversing or in your email that this is mainly that there are more law enforcement officers on your panel than there are civilians.
On our panel? What do you mean? I don't understand your question. When you say our panel, on our board
on your board or whatever.
No. None of our board, our bylaws prohibit any law enforcement, current or former law enforcement, to be on our board. So, but on the panels that we have, it's very well received. I mean, it used to be that, the oversight groups would have their annual meetings, and, the law enforcement agencies would have their, IACP, which is the International Association of Chiefs of Police, they have their annual conferences. And now we're to the point where we're being invited to their conferences to present on oversight. We're inviting members of law enforcement to present at our panels to share, because we recognize, I believe, as in this whole profession, that we need to work together to solve many of these challenges. So they are on our panels as presenters, from multiple agencies across the country, sharing their experiences and what they are doing in their communities, as well as professionals, from the mental health community, professionals that work with, advocacy agencies. Those are all included on our panels for, training and education.
So when you're talking about the way that police are responding to people who are going through mental health crisis, what has been the general feedback from the panel, the officers that sit down on these panels? Are they acknowledging that they have a problem with this, or is it a dismissive conversation?
Oh, no, absolutely. They're acknowledging that, that there's more that we can all learn from, because each experience may be a little bit different, and, they're open to, the input that different members from the panel are presenting, and the panelists, that are non-law enforcement are also open to the challenges that law enforcement are having, in these responses. I think a lot has to do with, sharing those experiences so that we each understand, where the other is coming from with these responses. I think it's very well received by all participating.
Okay, so let me tell you what that would look like for me. So here we are, there's 10, 15 of us, we're sat around a table. We're having a conversation about the impact that police are having on the mental health community, the outcry that the communities are having, the loved ones that are still grieving and can't work out why their loved ones are laying down dead and they're still having to bury them. And then we've got law enforcement officers that are sat down on a panel around a table that are saying, I agree with you, we need to do something about this. Why isn't that moment seized? And someone saying, right, okay, let's get a board up. Let's start brainstorming. What can we do to make things different? How do we make this better? What do we take back with us? I go to I'm an evangelist, all right? So I go to an evangelist conference 3 or 4 times a year. And the one thing that we do at the end of every conference is the guy that's leading it, Mr. Barry Woodward, who's my mentor, will turn around and say, right, what's your one takeaway from this? What are you going to take away from this session that you're going to go back to where you've just come from and implement? So therefore, when we're talking about stuff like qualified immunity or how police are managing mental health related issues, and you're talking about this has been in open conversation and people are agreeing that there's a problem with this, what are people taking away from this and saying that they're going back to their stations to try and make a difference with? What policies and procedures are being changed in order to make sure that this change actually takes place?
Right. And I can tell you, I don't know. I don't know what people are going back and implementing, in their own communities. I can tell you that an example in my community, and actually I use one of our sergeants that actually works with what we call the MIST team. It's the mental health. I'm going to forget the acronym, but we had him do an actual webinar on, for our membership or individuals that were interested. And one of the things that they do here that I know that they've been implementing in other law enforcement agencies across the country also is this particular team goes out in plain clothes. They're not in uniform. They're trying to take the role of being more of on how they work with the interactions to begin with. And one of the things that they recognize that, showing up to some of these calls, sometimes just the perception of the officers being in uniform was put them at a disadvantage with their ability to be able to communicate with some of these individuals. So, I mean, that's just one of, multiple suggestions that they gave. So I can't tell you what they're going back and implementing, because to your point of, the takeaways, what are they going back and doing in their communities? We don't have kind of a report back other than what individuals are sharing in their own networks amongst each other as far as what their takeaways are from what they learn at the conferences.
That's good. I mean, for me, if people are talking about it around the table, you'd expect to see some sort of difference being made when they get back into their workplace.
Right.
That's what would normally happen, right? So if you went to a conference, for Nicole, for example, whatever that conference might be, and they started to discuss stuff that was pertinent to your workplace, and you felt that, oh wow, we could use that where we are. That would work where we are. You'd take that back to your colleagues, and you'd sit down at your next staff meeting and you'd say, right, okay, I went to this conference. This is what they suggested. I don't know what it looks like here, but it's a great idea. Can we not see if we could use it? And somebody goes, oh, wow, fantastic. Let's see how that looks here. You try it out. It works. It's better. Bam, let's use it. So my point being is, if people are acknowledging that how they approach people that are going through mental health related issues is wrong, why are we still not seeing a difference in how they approach that very same situation? Because lives are still being lost. And as part of your and this is not a personal attack on you, right? By no means, because I really do appreciate the fact that you've come here, right? Is that we value all human life and the dignity of every person. And this is what we're talking about: life. Law enforcement agencies act constitutionally without bias, are respectful to the public, hold officers accountable, and seek public input in developing and implementing policies, procedures, and training. All of these things, for me, right, suggest that there is something that you can put together that has a bit of clout, that says to a law enforcement officer, we need to do something about this. Because if these guys speak out and say, well, for example, I wonder how it would look if you had a issue take place 3 months down the line, and somebody from Nicole stands there in front of national TV and says, but we talked about that last month. I wonder, how does that look for an organization that says, but we didn't listen? Do you understand where I'm coming from?
No, I mean, I understand where you're coming from, and I think that, and I'm not, and I take your comments, very openly and so forth as well. I think the issue is, how do we affect change? Obviously, yes, this isn't our mission statement, but at the end of the day, they're just words, right? They're just words on paper. I mean, what is actually being done? What is the actual outcome? Because what we're interested in is outcomes. And I don't think this, our organization has ever really been in a position to kind of measure outcomes or have the authority to impose, some of these outcomes. I mean, because we can say it all we want, whether it's practiced is a whole different thing, right?
Let's bring in Scott, can we? We've got about 10, 12 minutes left. I want to bring in Scott. Your thoughts, Scott. Unmute, Scott, unmute.
Okay, I'm sorry. I was just listening, and very powerful conversation, first of all. And I know the show's just about out of time, believe it or not, Liane. And I want to thank you, and I want to thank the mission of NACOL and your sincere responses. And I guess the only thing I want to do in concluding is just to kind of, when I was thinking about your last comments, Kervin, with Liane, behind all of this education and legislation and political activity are people. It's people. I used to have 2 children. I have 1 now. You're a mom, Liana. Kervin's a dad. If you put yourself in my position on hundreds and hundreds of other moms and dads that have gone through what I'm going through, I mean, it's all nice to have everything on paper, like you said, words on paper, but behind it all is people. And that's just something we have to, Nicole and me and everybody else, all your listeners, there's people that are behind this, families. And I think I'm going to mute on that.
Thank you, Scott. Let's just bring in Jerry, if we can.
Liane, I just want to thank you for being here. I thank you for your the work you're doing. I thank you for being candid with everybody here. And I think Scott is absolutely right. The thing we tend to overlook is that there are people that are hurting and people that have endured tremendous loss. And I understand it's not Nicole's responsibility. It really does boil down to individuals within their own community being involved with their elected officials and bringing about change. But the flip side of that is that it's kind of disheartening and humbling for me as a former law enforcement officer to recognize that we have to have this kind of conversation because law enforcement has lost the focus of what it is. We always have been servants of the public and accountable to the public, yet for somehow we were able to position ourselves away from being accountable to the public. And the two elements that you speak highly of and your organization is pushing or what is needed within law enforcement, and that is ultimately transparency for the law enforcement agencies to be much more transparent about what they're doing and some type of accountability. My personal feeling is that the accountability has to be with the leadership of police organizations. They have to be held accountable because once they start being held accountable for their transparency, they will infuse that strategy down throughout the lowest ranks of their organization. With that, I'll just keep my mouth shut and thank you very much for being involved in it.
Well, I just want to thank Scott and Jerry for their contributions so far, but I've just going to carry on with a couple more minutes with Liana because I think there's positives to be had. I think the most important thing that we need to remember is NACOL is not there for themselves. They're there for you, for the community. We can see exactly what they're about. The National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement. The mission is to create a community of support for independent civilian oversight in titles that seek to make their local law enforcement agencies more transparent, accountable, and responsive to the communities that they serve. It comes with great honor when you manage to get into a position like that where you feel that there's an opportunity to have an influence. On a personal level, Liana, how much further would you like to see NACOL go as far as the role that they play as when they sit around the table?
Well, I really think what's missing a lot has been, I mean, we've done a lot over the past 25 years to professionalize what oversight is, like make it an actual profession, oversight. But I think that what the voice sometimes that is often missing at the table, either at the national level when we're talking about it, or even within communities, is the community voice. And we are trying to get more community activists and advocates involved in the work that we do, because we recognize that they're coming from a different perspective that sometimes, even we as, oversight professionals often tend to, we lose sight of that sometimes. And I think that, kind of encouraging that additional voice at the table, it has to be those stakeholders and those affected individuals and the people that have suffered the loss of a loved one, from, police, involvement. those voices still have to continue, because we, at the end of the day, you're right. I mean, it is about people and how people are treated, how people are respected. One of the things that I neglected to say, if I have a few minutes, just a few seconds here, a few minutes, is that NACOL is also, over the last couple of years, since you have a national, international audience here, we have seen in the last maybe 5 to 6 years, NACOL, the attendance at our conference and the information requests that we are getting are coming also from the international level. We have countries, I couldn't even start to name all of them, that are contacting us with respect to how to create oversight in their countries. Canada has a very robust civilian oversight system. There are other, we've had representatives from, Asia, from Europe, from Mexico. We went down and did some work with Mexico City about 3 years ago. They're trying to create oversight in Mexico for the whole country. Talk about creating oversight at the federal level. That's what they are trying to do. And imagine the challenges with that. So what works over there may not work here. Just like I said, what's working in different states, because of different laws, if you're trying to do it at a countrywide level, that's a huge challenge. But for your listeners, I mean, this isn't just something that is just happening, in the United States with respect to these oversight entities. There are movements about in different countries all around the world to try and create oversight.
Yeah. Just one more point that was made by Paula Arietta. She says, maybe these oversight committees need experienced ADA coordinators. Once the stronger federal laws are followed by police departments toward individuals with disabilities, then maybe a gap between the oversight and chiefs of police could ease in a better, quicker changes in policy and procedures. I don't know if you'd agree with that or not. But you do have an upcoming conference coming up, I believe.
Well, I will say, God willing, we will have that conference in August. That's still up for discussion. Obviously, we're planning on it. We have all the pieces in place, but that will be a discussion that we will be having in the next couple of weeks, given the current state of affairs. If, travel and things, restrictions, relax, we hope to, proceed as planned.
And where would people be able to find out more information about you if they wanted to find out?
On our website, it's www.nacole.org.
Thank you very much.
And there's also other contact information on our website with respect to our email address and our phone number and everything. It's all on the website.
Do it's been an absolute pleasure having you on board, Liane, and especially with your honesty. And your genuineness and your willingness to answer any question that was put to you. You didn't shirk anything, and some of them were quite strong, but rightly so. We had to test the waters on this, and I'm quite sure that we're going to have you back as a guest again in future. And now that you've had your baptism of fire, you'll look forward to coming back the next time, I hope.
Thank you. I appreciate it, and I look forward to it.
Liane Perez, Executive Director of NACOL. NACOL, once again, if you don't know who they are or what they stand for, is the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement. I want to thank you. I want to thank Scott and Jerry for being on the show and supporting it as well as they've done. I want to thank TJ for putting the show all together, and I want to thank you, the audience, who have participated and contributed so very well on this wonderful experience that we've just had. We look forward to seeing you again next week. In the meantime, take care of yourselves, take care of each other. Remember, this coronavirus is real, COVID-19. It's taking lives. Please stay home, stay safe, save lives. My name is Kervin Julien. This has been Issues Today on World Jam Global Radio. I'm out of here.
World Jam Global Radio. This is clarity.
I already did my time. I paid for my crime. time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Back in the day.